So my name's Petra Sultan. I'm the Director of Advocacy and Education for Thrive, the Alliance of Nonprofits for San Mateo County. And you are at the Story of Water in San Mateo County, Challenges to Equity and Sustainability. A little bit about Thrive. Next slide. There you go. Thrive empowers nonprofits, as it says, to unite their voice and influence, build their partnerships, and form cross-sector partnerships. So we do this by bringing together nonprofit organizations, government entities, foundations, businesses, and community leaders that share a commitment to improving the quality of life in San Mateo County. We offer a wide range of programming that goes across a lot of different issue areas. Next slide, Doug, please. So our current areas of focus include nonprofit capacity building, cross-sector collaboration, and policy and advocacy, with emphasis on arts and culture, basic needs and safety net, immigration, and workers' rights. We have right now a lot of work going on in civic participation around redistricting. We have an event on March 3rd if you're interested in redistricting. It's a big issue right now. We're also working very hard on our outreach around COVID-19 education and vaccine equity work. Of course, environment and sustainability, which is what you're all here for. And we also have a new peer learning series for people who are working on learning hubs. I want to invite everyone on March 11th to a community forum about vaccine equity and updates about our community. With that, I'd like to pass it over to Doug Silverstein, who's our Environment and Sustainability Lead. Again, Thrive is a membership-based organization, but this is one of our community benefits, as we call them. But if you want to hear more about membership or to find out where you can sign up for some of those events, just go to thrivealliance.org. So, Doug?
Thank you, Petra. So as Petra said, my name is Doug Silverstein, and I lead Thrive Environment and Sustainability Community Programs. Let me jump to the next slide. Our mission is to discuss sustainability challenges and solutions, and do so through a lens of equity. And we do this with our monthly meetings like this one. Usually they are the third Thursday of every month, and we invite government, nonprofit, business, and youth leaders to these meetings. And we rotate amongst topics, including climate, energy, food, land, transit, waste, and water. We've been fortunate to have over 100 amazing speakers, like our speakers today, across our 30 meetings in the last 3 years. It's amazing. We've been doing this as long as we have, so thank you for joining us today and in the past. We have had over 1,000 attendees across this time. So again, thanks for your support. And if you could do us a favor, we'll be sending a 3-minute feedback survey to each of you after this meeting. So please help us out and tell us what you liked about this meeting and what you want from future meetings. At this time, I'd like to recognize our 2 sponsors, which are Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District and Peninsula Clean Energy. They've been strong supporters of Thrive ENS programs and believers in our mission. So thank you, Mid-Pen and PCE, for helping making these meetings happen. In the Thrive ENS program, we also create action groups and take leaderships on specific sustainability challenges, like we did a year ago with single-use plastics. And in this case, we brought together 30 community leaders in a cross-section action group that we called Reduce and Rethink Single-Use Plastics in San Mateo County. And on this 5-month project, we defined the challenges and possible solutions in a paper that we published, you see on the left, in August 2020. It was a great effort. You could find a copy of it on thrivealliance.org, and emanating from this work on the right side, you see is a new collective impact project called Circular SMC, which is a community alliance to reduce single-use plastics in San Mateo County. And you can see its mission is to accelerate countywide health and equity by aligning plastic reduction and circular solution action. You can contact me if you want to learn more about that exciting project. And then quickly on our next meeting, which also focuses on water. That's Thursday, March 25th. So that's 4 weeks from right now. And it covers specifically on water quality and equity issues on our beautiful south coast of San Mateo County. And surprising to many in the county, the south coast unfortunately has inadequate access to unpolluted water at the local school and selected homes and businesses, which we're going to be talking about. And furthermore, some of the south coast issues also struggle with sewage treatment challenges. It will be an open format forum for the March meeting and feature leaders discussing groundwater and wastewater challenges, as well as small scale water systems and gray water solutions. So if you want to, in this, like I said, it's more of a discussion forum than a panel. So if you want to bring forward specific topics or challenges to this March meeting, or if you have solutions expertise in the areas of this topic and that geography, please contact us in the coming weeks. And the registration is open for this program. So please register now at thrivealliance.org. So welcome to this panel. Where experts are going to provide information about our countywide water source challenges and solutions. I'm excited to have our speakers today and for you to learn more about the story of water in San Mateo County. So the format today, the format is that each speaker, actually Carlos is going to be a little shorter than the rest, but the following 3 speakers have about 12 minutes, and then we'll open it up for question and answers. And our focus for this panel is, are San Mateo County's water sources robust enough for the climate and sustainability challenges that lie ahead? So a key assumption that we have at Thrive is that together we're more powerful and poised to achieve action, to achieve locally sustainable water supplies if we work together. So we ask that, in addition to learning from today's session, that you please jot down a few names of a speaker or others in the audience that you might want to engage with and get together with them or reach out to them in the coming weeks. We'll be sending an email after this event with more information from each speaker and topic. So with that, as I said, Carlos is going to give a quick message, but our first speaker, Carlos Moreno, Community Outreach Special at Peninsula Clean Energy, has a short message on PCE programs for residents. I should start by saying, while we don't often think of the crossover between water and energy, all of our water systems require energy. They require substantial sources of power and hopefully 100% clean power. So thankfully, PCE provides our residential and commercial water systems with near 100% renewable energy. And so the slides actually he's got today are not specific to water, but they're consider these, please, an important public service announcement. So Carlos, I'm going to start with you.
Great. Thanks so much. First of all, Doug and Petra for putting on this event. We're Peninsula Clean Energy. If you can move forward, please. Yeah, so just looking through the names, looks like most everyone probably has heard of Peninsula Clean Energy before, but if you haven't, we are the community electricity provider, providing electricity for almost everyone in San Mateo County at lower rates. And the way it works is that, our core business is to provide electricity. We generate electricity on behalf of all the residents and customers and businesses, majority of businesses in San Mateo County. PG&E, they own the power lines and deliver that electricity. And for all of you, you're automatically helping the environment and saving a little bit of money. Next slide. So part of the community impact that we've had is we've been able to save residents an estimated $18 million, which is estimated metric tons, 144,000 carbon emissions saved, which is equivalent to removing 30,000 cars from the road for 1 year. Next slide. And as I mentioned, we're a public agency, so we're beholden to all residents. Our board is made up of city council members, so we reinvest our earnings into programs, and these are our 3 program areas. But on top of that, we also reinvest in community agencies like Thrive and others, to further, talk about climate issues that are happening, to talk about equity issues when it comes in relation to climate. And our 3 main program areas right now is transportation, resiliency, and buildings, and all of which, and most of which, include equity at the forefront. Next slide. So I'm going to talk real quick about a few of those programs. First is a heat pump water heater program. We're giving up to $2,500 rebate to replace your methane gas water heater to a fully electric heat pump water heater, as well as additional rebates if you need electrical panel upgrades, and even more rebates if you're on the Care Farah discount rate. And we're partnering with Bayren for that. And all San Mateo County residents are eligible. Next slide. And we also have EV incentives. So if, regardless of income, we offer up to $200 for you to rent an EV. We want everyone to have an experience, to experience what it is like to have an EV, charging, sort of the speed and fun of having an EV. So up to $200 if you use Turo or rent a car anywhere, we'll give you $200 back to rent that EV. And we also have discounts on used EVs. Back one slide real quick. For people who are income qualifying, so for an individual, it's around $51,000, and it scales up depending on how many people are in your household. Next slide. Resiliency is also an important topic right now. We've all seen what happened in Austin and here, even in California during the fires. We want people to stay connected. We have programs around people who are medically vulnerable so that they can have backup power. But what we have right now is one around homeowners to offer them up to $1,250 rebate to install a solar plus storage system. And we're working with Sunrun for that. And all this information can be found on our website. Next slide. And that's all I have for today. So if you have any questions, feel free to send me a chat and happy to correspond. But thanks so much, Doug and Petra. Really appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you, Carlos, and thank you, Peninsula Clean Energy, again, for supporting these programs. So our next speaker is Tom Francis, the Water Resource Manager at Bay Area Water Supply and Conservation Agency, otherwise known as BAWSCA. Tom oversees BAWSCA's water supply efforts, including reliability, acquisition, and conservation. And he's responsible for BAWSCA's long-term reliable water supply strategy and the design and execution of water conservation programs. He'll be talking today about our water systems, historic beginnings, current state, and plans for the future. Tom, take it away.
Great. Oops. So great, next. So this is just my intro slide, and that's a pretty picture of Petcadero Reservoir, which is up in sort of the Yosemite area. I wanted to point you to that before I go to the first slide in my presentation. I wish I could say that there's a whole lot of water draining into the reservoir, but right now we're potentially in a bit of a drought. So let's hope for rain in the coming weeks. Next slide. So as Doug mentioned, I want to talk a bit about the history of our water system. And I'm going to spend some time talking about the elements of what it takes to bring water to San Mateo County. And you can kind of see those cookie cutter, different colored boxes there on that figure off to the right. Those are the BAWSCA member agencies. So you can see it not only includes a number of the San Mateo County water agencies, but also agencies in Santa Clara and in Alameda County, the southern part of the county. And I'll close by talking a bit about the future, because we need to think about things like climate change and other issues, and how we can help make our water supplies more robust. So just one message I hope that you'll leave from this presentation is just where your water comes from and what you as residents can do to help stretch that supply. Next slide. So the history of the water system, it dates back into the 1800s, and this is an old map that shows kind of before the Hetch Hetchy system was built, how water was brought into the city of San Francisco. Most of what we have present right now in San Mateo County wasn't present in the 1800s. The towns were little. It was kind of an agricultural county, and there's this entity that was called Spring Valley Water Company that was, it was a private company that was put in place by people for profit that looked at developing a water system to meet not just San Francisco needs, but also some of the needs of the farming interests essentially that were within the Peninsula area and beyond. So some of these little colored blocks around there just show the lands that were associated with that private water company. And again, it was in place from around 1860 all the way up to 1930. And that's essentially how San Francisco met its water supply needs before the Hetch Hetchy system was built. Next slide. So what happened? How did San Francisco take it upon themselves to develop a regional water supply? Essentially, the 1906 earthquake happened, but even before the earthquake, there were some large fires in the city of San Francisco, and it kind of illustrated to the people that ran the city and also lived in the city the need for a more reliable water supply. The fires, grew pretty robustly, and they just didn't have an easy way to put them out. So after the earthquake, the leaders essentially of San Francisco determined that they needed to find a more reliable or a permanent source of water. And to find that source, or to capture that source, they needed to look up into the Sierras. So they went to many, many places up in the Sierras and looked for a supply. They finally honed in on this Hetch Hetchy Valley, which again is within the Yosemite National Park. And I won't go into a lot of details here for the purposes of time, but there was federal legislation that was established that allowed them to actually build that reservoir, and an act called the Raker Act that was developed. It wasn't necessarily universally accepted, because you can imagine the Hetch Hetchy Valley is a beautiful valley, and there were even environmentalists back in those days that had concerns, but the need for water supply kind of won out, so to speak. And this progression then was followed. They built what's called O'Shaughnessy Dam, one of the first dams in the Hetchy system, in 1923. In 1930, San Francisco actually purchased that Spring Valley Water Company that I showed you on the previous slide. So they took control of all the different dams and conveyance facilities that were part of that system. And for you folks in the San Mateo County, if you've ever actually ventured back essentially into the woods, there's one dam called the Pilcitos Reservoir that was part of that sale. Over in Alameda County, there's another dam called Calaveras Reservoir that was part of the sale. So, it was a very good purchase, so to speak, by the city, and hence it was taken out of private hands and then made into a public entity that owned them. And by 1934, Hetch Hetchy was actually constructed. That's the main reservoir in the photo that I showed you, and that allowed essentially a very reliable water supply to be provided to the city. So you might say, well, how does that benefit, or how did that benefit us, so to speak, by San Mateo County and the entities in Santa Clara and Alameda? Well, to get that Raker Act passed, it was required, or it was part of the deal, is that water would not just be supplied to the city of San Francisco, but also to all of us. So it was essentially a very good, if you will, a very good deal, not just for San Francisco, but for us as residents to get that source. Next slide. So this is a graphic that shows if you will, the San Francisco regional water system, how we actually take delivery of water from Hetch Hetchy and some of the local reservoirs that I pointed out. So I won't spend a whole lot of time on this slide, and you can see it's not necessarily to scale, but You can see on this figure, there's O'Shaughnessy Dam. That's the dam that basically holds the water in Hetch Hetchy. There's a couple of other upstream reservoirs in the Sierras that factor into that equation. Water travels from that reservoir through a series of pipes and tunnels all the way across San Joaquin Valley, so to speak, San Joaquin pipeline. And then it enters into the bay. There's a large number of transmission pipelines that then follow all the way up the peninsula to the city of San Francisco. I'll briefly mention there's other dams that are very significant. New Don Pedro is a dam that essentially is used primarily by the irrigation districts, Modesto and Turlock irrigation districts, but it also is used as part of a power system as well. And it's an extremely large reservoir, you know, up toward the Sierras. And there's some other boxes there. Those are the treatment plants that actually treat the water. The water from Hetchy is pretty pristine. It requires very minimal treatment, but we still have treatment plants in place because we have local supplies as well. All of these pipelines, there's what we call turnouts to the different cities and member agencies. Those actually are access points along the transmission line that are used to supply water to the different water agencies that are present within the BAWSCA membership area, including about 16 within San Mateo County. Next slide. So what are some characteristics? I kind of just briefly went over them, and I'll because time is minimal here, I'll just mention there's 8 reservoirs, 3 power plants, you know, thousands of acres of watershed land that are part of the system that basically are managed by the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission and their staff. Miles and miles of pipeline. It's 167 miles from Hetchy all the way into the Bay Area up to the city. Lots of tunnels. You can see 340 miles of tunnels. So basically it's a lengthy system. The one thing, and I know we just had a brief mention about power, gravity is what's used to move the water from Yosemite, essentially from Hetchy, all the way up to Fisherman's Wharf. So we don't need a whole lot of pumps, and pumping water is a huge drain on California's electric system. If you look at how much it costs or what potential or what portion of electricity is required to pump water from Northern California to Southern California, I believe that's almost 30% of all the power use in California is just to pump water. So it's a big issue. And our collective water supply requirements, if we max out what we can take from Hetchy, is about 265 million gallons a day a year. So MGD, I should say. So that's a large volume. And you'll see on some coming slides, we don't use all of that now. In the future, we're growing, you know, closer and closer to that 265 limit. Next slide. So I won't spend a whole lot of time on this slide either. I've kind of pointed out the fact that there's lots of member agencies. San Mateo County, if for those of you that live in the county, I'm assuming you know who you buy your water from or pay your water bill to, but that list there is pretty complete because in San Mateo County, the vast majority of water agencies are members that rely on San Francisco. Although you'll hear from a speaker today, the system that she manages is one of those that doesn't have access to the San Francisco supplies. So it's not universal. There's a few smaller water districts that were not part of the San Francisco system when this was built and constructed. Next slide. So how much do we rely on that Hetchy source? You'll see it's not the total pie. It by far is the majority of the pie, so to speak, in terms of what makes up our water. But many of our member agencies have sources that are beyond just the surface water from Hetchy. You'll see groundwater is a significant component for those parts of the county that actually have the ability to pump groundwater because there's a generous groundwater basin underlying their service area. They have those systems in place. Recycled water is a greater and greater part of our mix of supplies. It's kind of the natural way. Instead of just discharging it to the bay, we'll recycle. And you're going to hear from Eric Hansen later today. It's potentially going to be an even bigger picture in the future. And there's others in this pie. I won't go through them, but there's more than just Hetchy. And in the future, we're going to have to rely on more and more than just Hetchy because that source has its limits. Next slide. In terms of just the past 10 years, and I think I'll have you advance it one more time, Rebecca, there's some arrows that should pop up, I think. Yeah. You'll see that over the last 10 years, from about 2010 or 2008 in this case, to where we are present day, our water use has really dropped as a region significantly by about 20%. And hence our purchases from the San Francisco system have dropped. And our recycled water use has grown quite a bit. And we need those trends to continue. What's happening is people are more efficient. They're using a lot more conservation measures. Residents are conserving. New construction is being much more water conscious and focused. And beyond that, recycled water projects have a big push over the last 10 years to put them in place. Let's face it, we don't necessarily need to irrigate golf courses or potentially cemeteries with potable water. We could look at providing recycled water and help stretch our supplies for our own human needs even further. So just wanted to point that out. It's dropped down, and that's a good thing. And our residents get a lot of the credit for that. Next slide. So BAWSCA just finished a demand study, and I wanted to show this slide because it kind of shows our water use off to the left half of that chart and what we predict for the future off to the right. The green line is population, and you can see population continues to increase well into the future. But if we compare what we as a region, and by region, I mean not just the BAWSCA member agencies, but San Francisco, what our water use is, you'll see in 1985, it was about 255 or so million gallons a day. And by 2045, our prediction, so to speak, our estimate, is going to be less than that. So we're growing quite a bit. We've added almost, if you look on this slide, almost a little over 1 million people, and we're using less water than we did in 1985. Conservation, better practices of how we use and maintain our water supply is definitely the reason why, and it will continue to be a big reason why into the future. Next slide. So what are the challenges? What do we have to deal with as a region? I've listed some of the big ones here, but there's more than just what I've shown. Climate change is going to be a challenge. It's going to impact how much snowfall is going to be generated upstream of Hetchy, if you will, or up in the top part of the Sierras. It might be hotter here locally. So while we are going to discourage over time, these big green lawns, it still is going to have an impact on outdoor water use for sure. Population growth, the people at ABAG, the Association of Bay Area Governments, their prediction is the population is going to grow perhaps even greater than what I showed in that previous slide. So the more people you have, the more water use potentially that could come about. Regulatory requirements are a challenge for us as water agencies. I won't go into in-depth detail today, but there is a need to provide better fishery habitat and more water on the rivers to address fishery needs and the needs of the environment in general. We at BAWSCA and the other water agencies are trying to see if there's a way to do that and still maintain water supply reliability. It's a challenge, I'll admit, and it will be probably a hot button topic over the next few years because there continues to be debate between the environmental community and the water agencies just to how to go about that. So it's an issue. I do think over time, we are going to have to look at making ways to allow those fisheries to thrive. And those ways may end up being more water into the river, or perhaps just the timing of those releases need to be adjusted. Groundwater overdraft, I mentioned groundwater supply is a big factor in some of the BAWSCA member agencies matrix. And so we need to look at how we manage groundwater, because if you pump too much, you can overdraft the basin, and that can lead to all sorts of problems. And water quality concerns, there's more and more contaminants that need to be considered as you, especially for local supplies, that you need to treat for, and that's going to be a future challenge for us. Next slide. So I'm going to talk about some projects here, but just very briefly because of time. There are some recycled water projects being planned because this is, again, these are what we're going to see in the future. Daly City has a recycled water project that's in place, And some of the cemeteries, that's actually a picture of a cemetery. Some of you might wonder what the heck is that? The cemeteries up at Colma use groundwater as part of their irrigation systems. And we would like to see if there's a way that we could put them on recycled water. So we would have to build pipelines and make sure that the supply is there of recycled water, but we could potentially take those cemeteries off of groundwater, and then that groundwater would be available for use as part of our potable supplies within that neck of the county. A couple of other projects are actually treating wastewater and making it potable. And by potable, I mean drinking water quality. And that is one of the big ideas, and it's more than just an idea, that is the future of water supply for many agencies and areas of the country, not just in California. Because let's face it, new dams or taking more water from rivers just isn't the step forward in the future. So we're looking at ways of recycling and treating it to a potable level. And there's two projects that we're planning along with San Francisco, and you'll hear about that one in more detail from Eric, the one in your neck of the woods in San Mateo County. Next slide. So expanded reservoir storage is something that is on plan or being planned as part of the regional water system. Calaveras Reservoir, which is over in Alameda County, it just had an upgrade to that dam. There's ability to raise that dam. It's in the early planning stages. There's environmental considerations to make before one would go forward and actually do that. But that's a possibility, and we could actually add more storage to that reservoir, and that would serve as a source for water, particularly during droughts, which is when we would need it. There's another big regional project that's part of our collective plan. It's over in Contra Costa Water District service area. So it's in Contra Costa County. It's called Pilcitos Reservoir. Many partner agencies, along with BAWSCA and San Francisco, are taking part in that project. And that's going to be another raise of a reservoir. They would put water in from the, basically it's a little bit past the delta that they could pump water into it. Contra Costa has water rights there. And then that water would be made available, following treatment to us and many other partners for use during droughts. Next slide. I won't talk about all these measures, but I did see some of the questions that came in. One of the ways that you as a resident can help in terms of making sure our demands stay low is to do a lot of conservation. And I listed a 24 new conservation measures. These are beyond what we're doing now at BAWSCA, because we're already doing about 22 measures that we're helping our member agencies implement. Things like landscaping, some of these irrigation hardware incentives. So for those of you that have lawns that you irrigate, we have incentive programs, or we're planning them to help you pay for new hardware that would use less water. School retrofits, multi-family high efficiency toilets. Those are all concepts that we'll probably be embarking upon in the future. And there could be ordinances and codes. That's a big way to basically force the reduction of water supply. And by force, I mean, if it's a requirement for new construction or maybe a modification of an existing home or business, having an ordinance in place that requires the builders to put in low water use appliances or fixtures is an important way to cut the water use. Next slide. So one of the things that Doug asked me for is to just share some common terms. And frankly speaking, water supply and water use, there's a whole lot of terms out there. So I can make this available to you folks. You can drop me an email. But I found that for water recycling or water reuse, there's a good glossary of terms available from this particular website that a nonprofit has put in place. And then for water supply in general, there's the USGS has a great index, or basically dictionary of all those terms. Water efficiency strategies, that there isn't necessarily a nice, if you will, a nice glossary on those, but I found that the EPA has a really good website that goes into details about a lot of the strategies that BAWSCA has helped our member agencies implement, along with just the topic of water efficiency itself, and what not necessarily just residents can do, but businesses and communities can do to encourage water efficiency. So I think I'm on my last slide now, Rebecca. Here's my contact. It's tfrancis@bawsca.org. I've listed my cell there because right now we're so busy working from home. I'm mostly on my cell. I'm hardly in the office. And I know there's probably going to be questions. It seems like we're going to wait until the end of the panel to go through questions and answers. So I will turn it back to you, Doug.
All right. Thank you, Tom. Our next speaker is Irma Mitton, the CEO and Eco District's AP of Fruition Sustainability Solutions. Irma wears many hats. As the leader of Sustainable Pescadero Community Group, she practices her commitment to promoting better stewardship of natural local resources, as she states, earth, water, energy, animals, and people. Within this community, she promotes her belief that technology and intelligence can restore our environment and advance civil society. She'll be talking about South Coast water. So this is a little glimpse into the meeting next month, specifically supply side droughts and infrastructure and demand side conservation and use. So Irma, take it away.
Off. Tigger off. Tigger off.
All right, there we go.
You're still muted.
I'm still
Irma.
mute.
Oh,
I
there you
think
go.
it-
Sorry,
okay,
I
Great,
muted
sorry.
the wrong
We can go
person.
ahead and thank you for the introduction. And Tom gave a great overview of where your water comes from when you live on the peninsula side, or over the hill, as we say, from the south.
All right.
Important, and that's kind of the focus of my first couple of slides. I am not a water expert. I'm not a water engineer. I'm not a hydrologist. I am a Are we okay? I was getting feedback there.
It's fixed. Go ahead.
Okay, great. So as I say, I'm not a water expert, but I am a big fan of water. I like to drink water. I like to bathe in water. I like to share water with my friends. So I'm sure most of you are too, and that's why you're here. And my focus today is to encourage everyone, no matter where you live, to really examine your relationship with water and the value it brings to your life. Not only the obvious for drinking and bathing and growing food, but also how water is part of our cultural identity. It's part of how we define ourselves as Bay Area residents. If we didn't have this water that, these huge bodies of water that anchor us. So whether you live or work or play on the bay side or the ocean side, water is the great connector for our society. So if you looked at Tom's map, and he showed all the BAWSCA water agencies, there were some big gaps. And those gaps are what are covered in this watershed map. These are the small water systems of the coast that are a mixture of very small water systems, some private, some mutual, and a lot of individual property owners who just have a single well. Excluding, of course, the more urban centers. I know there are representatives here from CCWD, who serves the Half Moon Bay and the coastal districts and the Montero Water District. But for the most part, there are about 4,000 or so residents that live south of 92 to Nees Creek to the county line that are not served by that big infrastructure. So you can imagine that the scale of our challenges is very different than what Tom described. But we have to have the same innovations and the same change in mindset in order to ensure that we have a sustainable and equitable water supply for all people, industry, agriculture, recreation, and for the diversity of flora and fauna that our region supports. So go ahead, next slide. Just to talk a little bit about what happens when supply and demand are out of balance. It leads to stress, it leads to incredible fragility. This is a closer up picture of my watershed. And if you look at this map of Pescadero, the Pescadero watershed, you look at these streams and you go, wow, look at all those resources you have, right? Plus we have an abundant, very high water table in some areas with great groundwater. So it looks like we have an abundance of water, but we also have incredible stresses on our supply. We have, first of all of the residents who live here. We have most of the agriculture in San Mateo County. As many of you know, if you shop at farmers market and you enjoy those nice, fresh, locally grown fruits and veggies, that water is usually drawn from groundwater wells or pumped directly from some of these creeks. And layered on top of all of that usage are all of the county parks, state parks, open space districts that we have out here, private parks that are, YMCA, Girl Scouts, and other organizations. All of those recreational facilities also have their own water systems. And again, it may be 5 hookups, but at their peak usage, they could be serving 100 people. Usually in the summer months, which is our driest months, when, our water supplies, if they're pumping from the creeks, that's when our water supplies are at the lowest, the creeks are at the lowest, and that's when our wildfire danger is the highest. So that kind of stresses us out. Add to that recurring droughts and sea level rise, and the saltwater intrusion that's bringing. And you can understand how very fragile this ecosystem is. And we see it every day because, as mentioned, I'm on the coast. I have a small farm. I have 1 domestic well, 2 agricultural wells, and my back property boundary is the creek. So I watch that creek level every day and I can see those immediate effects. So it's a little different perspective. Although I encourage everybody to keep an eye on Hetch Hetchy if that's where your water comes from. So next slide, please. So that's kind of our overview of where we are, how different it is from your environment, and yet it's very, very much the same. Our challenges are the same in terms of what Tom talked about in terms of climate change, groundwater use, needing to leave water in the ground for the animals, for the fish that we've worked really hard to bring back. It's the equity side where the gap, I think, between the rural environment and the urban environment is the widest and the most critical. One thing we don't usually talk about is the water that needs to be returned to the system, which is wastewater. On your side of the hill, you have a separate system that takes and treats your waste. At our side of the hill, we have all septics. And if one of those systems fail, or if those systems are not maintained and they start to fail, it's going to immediately impact our groundwater and our creeks. And we don't often know that a system has failed until we have a problem downstream in the creek. So as residents out here, we're very, very aware of our systems, and we're very aware of being accountable to each other, especially when you have, say, 8 property owners that are mutually managing their water supply. It's very different when you can look someone in the eye and say, hey, our reservoir, our spring, that fills the tank is really working overtime because somebody's got a leak somewhere. We've got to find it. And people band together. But what happens with is that direct costs are borne by the individual property owners. It creates inequities when there aren't those financial resources and there aren't the funding instruments that a water company would use to make infrastructure projects happen. So that's some of our biggest challenges. Is there's no easily accessible funding source for infrastructure improvements. There are high regulatory barriers to any expansion of our existing water infrastructure. If you're a business that needs more water for processing, or you're a homeowner who needs to replace a failed well. And it also means that there's no incentives for us to change behavior. So those wonderful measures that Tom talked about for conservation, for a large part, aren't accessible to homeowners, property owners that have their own systems. once in a while, there'll be a small program like within a county service area, which serves Pescadero and La Honda, that are urban areas, might run a conservation program. But by and large, across our watershed, we don't have access to those sorts of things. And so again, it's difficult to have equitable access to clean water when the mechanisms that the rest of society uses aren't available out here. And one of the most important things is that because our water system is so fragile, when something happens, it's harder for us to recover. We saw this a lot last summer. When there's a power safety shutoff, my well doesn't pump because it's not a gravity fed well, it's an electric pump. So that's just one of those things you deal with when you live in the country, but it's also a question of, do I have the resources to go out and get a solar panel and a battery backup system? Great. If I don't have those resources, what is the alternative? And as we'll talk about more next month in the South Coast session, the whole issue of not having a reliable potable water for our school districts has been a huge impact on our learning impact and on our learning and on the social welfare of the community. So next slide. So what's the point of talking about this in comparison to, the urban infrastructure, and how does that match up? Well, I believe the biggest challenge, whether it's urban infrastructure or rural, is that we as a whole society have lost respect and perspective about the value of water. And I'm not talking of value in the traditional economic sense of supply and demand. And when, supply is low and demand is high, then price goes up and then only the wealthy can afford it. That's not what I'm talking about. The value of water is the outcome, the benefit that it brings us. It's foundational to our climate, our food supply, economy, our health, and our wellness. So we need as a society to recognize that and to start rethinking our systems and the way we fund infrastructure so that it reflects that value. I was talking to a water advisor yesterday, and basically, to paraphrase him, he said, we expect people like Tom and Eric, we expect them to rebuild infrastructure with the dime and quarters they dig out of the couch cushions. And that pretty much sums it up. So one thing that I'm sure of is we're out of time. I see changes happening in my watershed at an accelerating pace, and we need some rapid investment now. And I'm super encouraged by some of the policies that are being driven at the state level to address, urban ag partnerships and exchange. If you've driven down Highway 84, you might have seen some new storage ponds going in. So we are creating more surface water storage. And there's wonderful new impact investing platforms being put together so that different models of funding can be available to small and rural communities and to urban environments, so that it's not all on the public sector to fund those infrastructure improvements, and you actually are recognizing the value that water brings, clean, sustainable water brings to the environment. So I'm super encouraged by that, but we can't have a trickle. It can't be innovation at a glacial pace. We need the dam to break. So if you on the other side of the hill are more vocal about sustainable and equitable access to water, if you show by your actions and your votes that you value a modern and safe water and wastewater infrastructure, everyone will benefit, and we'll all have an easier time getting access to water and being able to enjoy all of the quality of life that we can currently do. Next slide. So again, we're going to be talking more specifically about the solutions for rural communities next month in March. So I invite you to come back and join that conversation. Thank you.
There we go. Thank you, Irma. Very interesting. And our last speaker, Eric Hansen, civil engineer and recycled water manager for Silicon Valley Clean Water. Eric is a licensed civil engineer with over 25 years of experience in utility and water infrastructure, project management, planning, design, and construction. His work has included storage, conveyance, and corrosion mitigation and repairs in harsh marine environments to protect water, process, and data services. He is an expert in water regulations and has signed over 200 recycled water plans approved by the California Division of Drinking Water. Sounds impressive. Eric will be discussing how current water reuse can expand to help address future water needs. Eric, take it away.
Well, thank you, Doug. You know, I can't tell you how pleased I am to be here. And quite honestly, I couldn't have set up these presentations better if I tried. Tom described the system. Irma was a glimpse into the future. Irma's story is so poignant that we all need to listen to what she said. The fact that we need to be conscious about what we put down the sink, because that's what we're going to drink. And if you're living with septic systems, you don't want to use Roundup or things that will have legacy effects to our community. So with the same token, actually, also, I want to give credit to Doug and Rebecca. I tuned in and Doug's talking about reduction of plastics. So I can't tell you how much near and dear that is to my heart to hear that. And not only did he say that, but he also said locally sustainable water supplies. And I can't tell you how many times I have to explain to people what that is. So hearing it from Doug means that the word is getting out there, and listening to Irma just now was music to my ears, because she's like the canary in the coal mine. We really have to pay attention to how delicate our water supplies are. So with that, also, I also want to say that I just gave a presentation at the California Water Quality Monitoring Council, and to my surprise, these virtual presentations are really just kind of one way. I don't see your faces. So I'm hoping to have some dialogue with you later in the chat, or however Doug can arrange that. But I really look forward to some good conversation. So next slide. Yeah, so just to say, I bet you all know what this is. And I can't look at your faces, so I don't know. But for the sake of discussion, this was just dropped off on Mars as part of the Perseverance land rover. And next slide. And it converts carbon dioxide to oxygen. This is just as air. We all need air to survive. We also need water. We've been recycling water in space for decades, which is an amazing thing for me to say. But this is not new technology. We have the technology. We can be responsible, and we can use it. Next slide. So here we go. You got Earth and you got Mars. So if you can imagine a tether, it's just impractical to think about delivering our most critical resources through a long conveyance system. Next slide. The same token here, you see a, quite honestly, and I have to give a lot of credit to the engineers who designed this 100 years ago. It's an amazing system, but it was designed in an era of resource abundance. Our current model relies on our Sierra snowpack to store our water, and then in the summertime, we deliver it to long distances to arid communities like the Bay Area and Southern California. Well, we saw in the last drought that model fails. It's no longer working. And so because of that, the state of California has adopted several, they update it every year, the California water policy. And the short of it is we need to start looking at integrated water management and becoming regionally self-reliant on our resources, and water is of primary importance. Next slide. So locally sustainable water supplies, what is that? Well, I'm just going to give you the short of it. It's about reducing our demand on imported water and looking at alternatives to spending energy and resources into cleaning our water, and subject to the 1972 Clean Water Act, now discharging it into a saline water body. And every day, California discharges 1 billion gallons of treated water into the ocean. And as my colleague and friend Lester Snow, former Secretary of Natural Resources and former department director of the Department of Water Resources, said, if California, and this was during the drought, if California only knew that every day we were wasting 1 billion gallons of perfectly suitable water for reuse, well, we'd be thinking twice. So next slide. So, whoa, did we skip one? Oh,
No.
okay. We may have, but that's okay. I had a different one, but I'll just flip to that one. So we are partnering with our agencies in the San Mateo County area, and we are taking a closer look at what we call a PREP, Potable Reuse Exploratory Plan. So looking at that, we are looking at various strategies to use our locally sustainable water supplies and purify wastewater instead of discharging it into the bay. Next slide. So first, let me tell you a little bit about who I am and where I'm from. I'm from a little town in Kentucky. No, only kidding. So Silicon Valley Clean Water, we're located on Redwood Shores. And we like to think of ourselves as a resource recovery plant. We provide wastewater treatment, water recycling, and energy to our treatment plant process. And we serve about 220,000 people, including places like Menlo Park, Belmont, San Carlos, Redwood City. So next slide. Next slide, yeah. Yeah. So this is 5 years ago. I was given an offer I couldn't refuse, and I took the job. So the awesome thing about this agency that I work for is we're very nimble and strategic and innovative. Just to kind of give you an example of the things that we're doing, we've partnered with a company called Bioforce Tech, which creates Class A biochar for agricultural use. So we take biosolids and using pyrolysis, we disinfect and purify it as a rich carbon resource for agriculture. We also are working with a startup company out of Stanford University called Mango Materials. Really smart people developing technology to create nature's plastic, essentially plastic that is biodegradable and comes from methane generated from the treatment plant. And finally, I'm also, about 3 years ago, I started partnering with Stanford University and the folks at Renew It. Renew It is reinventing the nation's urban water infrastructure. And they're an engineering research center funded through the National Science Foundation. But the short of it is they're looking at reinventing the way we treat and distribute water. The Safe MBR photo that you see here, it's a way of using anaerobic bacteria instead of the current method that hasn't changed. It was first invented in 1913, if you can believe it. And for over 100 years, which it's just amazing to even say, we've been treating wastewater the same way. And it mimics nature's process, but it takes electricity and a blower, and it blows air into a tank to feed aerobic microbes to digest soluble organic matter and allow that material to settle so that we can purify the water. So the Safe MBR technology, which Professor Emeritus Pierre McCarty had discovered, and he'd been working on it since 1956. But the short of it is why don't we use, who'd have thought, let's leverage anaerobic microbes that don't need air. And this technology could reduce a treatment plant's energy demand by as much as 50% or more. On top of that, it also doubles the biogas production, essentially securing not only water supply security, but also locally produced energy security. So really wonderful things. And I'm just hoping that this we can get over this COVID thing and start showing people how this thing operates. That was the plan. It's funded through great people like at the California Energy Commission. And we're working on potable reuse in the next phase with the Bureau of Reclamation and the State Water Board. Next slide. So yeah, so here it is. So essentially this is a chart. I think I got it from SFPUC, but it essentially shows out past 2030 and 2035 and 2040, that we're going to get a steady population increase. And while we're doing great, but we should be doing better on our water use per capita, we need to start looking at new locally sustainable water supplies. We've been doing a great job on recycled water in California. I think we're only at 617 thousand acre feet per year, and we're shooting for 1 million acre feet per year. But that next level will really come to us through potable reuse. In other words, we've essentially grabbed all the parks and schools and industrial uses, and but really the next level, we need to start taking a look at augmenting our potable water supplies with locally sustainable supplies. Next slide. So yeah, so I saw in the chat somebody pointed out that yeah, we are in a drought. And if you take a look at this chart, it's very interesting. Essentially, since 2011 is when the drought began, and 8 years we were in a drought. I asked the same question to experts, and they didn't know it was 8 years. So not, humans, we have short memories, and we need to remind ourselves that things aren't the same as they used to. And we need to start making our water supplies, our critical resources, more resilient to factors that are out of our control. And you can see here, this is a recent chart. You can see here, we're even seeing touches of it towards the end of 2020. All right, next slide. So yeah, so look at this. This is what happened. Not many people, well, maybe you all have, but this was quite a significant photograph, and it really made the rounds back during the drought. But that's Lake Oroville, and you know, uh, we rely on these water reservoirs to provide our drinking water, and we just can't do that anymore. Next slide. So this is a river. The far, this is, I believe this is the Tuolumne River. The far right photograph shows a healthy high flow river. And then the middle photograph shows what happens in a drought and the impact it can have on our habitat. Now, the point being here is that when we get water restrictions from our water districts, they need to reduce the impact that pulling this water from our rivers and streams is having. And by using locally sustainable water supplies, we can reduce the demand that we have on imported water and keep it for our habitat and future generations to enjoy. Next slide. So yeah, so what is recycled water and potable reuse? Well, we've been doing it for hundreds of years in California. The short of it is upstream cities discharge their wastewater into rivers that go down to the next community. And in fact, there are sayings where the water that goes down to the Louisiana passed through 6 sets of kidneys. So, through dilution in the old days, that was fine. But now we need to start thinking about what we put down the sink, because we will eventually drink. And just listening to Irma's story about how precious water is, this is something that we all need to start thinking about when we're making those purchases at the register, and thinking about alternatives. Do I really need the double death, DDT to get rid of the scorpions out of my house? Well, is there another way? So next slide. So potable reuse basics. If you flip the next slide, Rebecca, that highlights, yeah. So the difference between indirect potable reuse, those 4 circles on the left, is that we have a environmental buffer or a reservoir that allows this water to be blended with runoff and other supplies and monitored. This is a valuable resource, and we've been functioning like this for years. And so this is a very viable option for us. And we're looking at Crystal Springs, for example, to provide that environmental buffer. And I'll go into why that strategy also has other value as well. Direct potable reuse. It's another way of doing it, but you get the water into the treatment system faster without an environmental buffer. It's going to require more monitoring, engineered reservoirs in cities, for example, tanks. So, but the cost could be less. For example, with indirect potable reuse, we would have to build pipelines in the ground, and now this could be multi-millions of dollars per mile up to the reservoir to store this water. Next slide. Yeah, so this slide here, very interesting. We're not the only ones doing it. This is happening all across the arid arid West. And the short of it here is that you can see here, and you can't really see it, it's too small, but some systems like in Los Angeles or Orange County They're using environmental buffers like groundwater injection, which allows the water to set there for a year. Scottsdale, Arizona, Clouds Rest, New Mexico, Big Sur, Texas. But then other people are looking at more direct potable reuse options, like in Wichita Falls, Texas. They actually started to do that. And this technology exists, and we can all benefit from it. Next slide. So what kind of technology am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about reverse osmosis. It's size exclusion is the technology. And we have built a similar system in the South Bay, right here in the South Bay in San Jose, called the Silicon Valley Advanced Water Purification Center. And it's actually purifying recycled water and reducing the total dissolved solids, or salts, using a size exclusion technology called reverse osmosis that essentially moves larger elements or salts out of the water and just produces pure water. Now, why is this technology better? It's good because there's no question we're removing everything but the water. But it does come at a cost. And this graphic here shows the size of a human hair, about 80 to 90 microns. And we got bacteria and certainly COVID virus. It's all on our radar. It removes viruses as well. And this technology is becoming cheaper. So this may be the time to start looking at incorporating this technology as part of our potable reuse system. Next slide. So this slide here essentially shows the other projects that are going on in California. Next slide, Rebecca. And you can see that green area. You can see 3 projects going on. We've got the one at the Santa Clara Valley Water District, or now called Valley Water. Soquel Creek Water District is also looking at potable reuse. And Monterey One Water just had, I think I have a slide for that. They just had their ribbon cutting ceremony. Next slide. Here, that's what that is. So the ribbon cutting ceremony for Monterey One Water is in the lower left. In the mid is the Silicon Valley Advanced Water Purification Center. And by the way, I encourage you to take a tour. It's certainly available. And these people are really knowledgeable, and they've got a great show. It's almost like Disneyland. So I encourage you to take a look. And then we've got Pure Water Soquel. Next slide. So the prep, what are we doing? So we're looking at several levels of potable reuse. The first one was to look at a groundwater resource recharge program. Can our local groundwater aquifers actually take as much water as we can produce? Right now, on average, and I should have said this earlier, but my treatment plant during the summertime discharges about 12 million gallons of water per day. And partnering with San Mateo, lo and behold, they are about the same size as us, and they discharge about 12 million gallons per day. So if I were to take 8 of those million gallons from each plant, that's 16 million gallons per day. And I was able to treat that with reverse osmosis. I could probably produce about 12 million gallons of pure water from those 2 plants per day. And we're looking at both options, a combined system, which I think is pretty smart, because if you're going to invest in an advanced water purification center, you want to make sure you utilize all potential resources, or one treatment plant. And that's not the end all, because what we do at our treatment plant would just be copied at the San Mateo plant, or vice versa, if the need were to arise. So essentially, phase 1, we concluded that producing water at that volume which is really the volume that would really make this treatment plant cost effective. And that's 365 days a year, 24/7. The groundwater basin in San Mateo County just does not have the volume for it. So we looked at phase 2, which was taking a look at a surface water or reservoir RWA augmentation project, where we would pump this water through new pipeline up the mountain and into Crystal Springs. Now, that's an interesting model.
Eric,
And
I want to jump in for a sec. We're running into our Q&A time.
yeah,
If you could pull it faster if possible.
yeah, let me just, why don't we just skip down to, keep going. I'll tell you when to stop. Yeah, yeah, that's,
Okay.
yeah,
Thank you.
so that's kind of what it looks like. And the next slide, Rebecca, next slide. And that's the Bay Area Water Partnerships, where we're working with our agencies and community to understand what it means about potable reuse and the importance of consistent communication. In Southern California, we heard the toilet to tap, inflammatory words like that can really make a rocky start and delay much needed investment. And again, I hear Irma's words now. The time is critical. Next slide. And that's a nice picture of Crystal Springs, and that's the end. So thank you very much. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you, Eric. Yeah, it was great that we have innovation leaders like you, and that we have Stanford nearby that we can partner with to, and a lot of these other innovative startups that you mentioned out of Stanford, which is great. So I think what I'll do is just open it up. I stopped sharing, and anyone who wants to jump in with a quick question. Let's start if someone has a quick question they want to provide to our speakers. We have a few that were sent in advance, but if you want to unmute yourself, we could be casual about this and raise your hand. Peter's got his hand up. Go ahead, Peter.
Hi, I'm Peter Dreckmeyer from the Tuolumne River Trust, and I want to thank the organizers and the panelists. This was a nice workshop, and I appreciated the focus on sustainability and environmental stewardship. And the Tuolumne River is in pretty bad shape, so we really need to take better care of it. For example, historically, there were over 100,000 salmon spawning in the Tuolumne. This year we had 1,000, so we're at 1%. And it's actually in the worst shape of all the Central California rivers. And one of the big problems is that so much water gets diverted, 4 out of every 5 gallons for human uses. So the unimpaired flow is just 20%. But the good news is that the State Water Board is updating the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan, and they've adopted higher flows of 40% between February and June, which will certainly improve conditions. There are lawsuits and other obstacles, so it hasn't been implemented yet. But the other good news, which I think you'll find interesting, is that at current demand, which is just under 200 million gallons per day in the entire SFPUC service area, the SFPUC could manage a repeat of the worst drought on record, which was 6 years from 1987 to 1992.
Is this a question? You have a question for the panelists?
I'll try to turn it into a question, okay. but I'm almost done. With the Bay Delta plan flows in place without requiring any rationing or the development of new water supplies. So we certainly need to develop new supplies, but we're in pretty good shape. If anyone wants to comment on that, great. Otherwise, we can move along. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And Peter sent a video on some of the work that Tuolumne River Trust is doing. I'll include that link in the follow-up email. Thank you for your work on that topic. Anyone want to jump in with the question?
Yeah, I had a question. First,
Okay,
I just
sure.
want to commend Eric on the plant. I was able to take a tour a couple years ago, and it's really amazing. But my question is just from the point of view of individual people, and we've been good at lowering water, but a lot of the programs are always aimed, the Lawn Be Gone program and other things. It's dependent on people being able to afford to pay somebody who's a qualified landscaper or whatever, to reduce it. And it really leaves out a lot of people that can't afford to pay somebody, who are just do-it-yourselfers. And how do we get, those people on board with a little of encouragement?
Sure. So one of the first things that they can do is, and this Zoom world that we're all living in maybe makes it easier, is there's a lot of classes that BAWSCA sponsors and our member agency sponsors for homeowners and residents, and a lot of these do-it-yourselfers. And I think that's the first place I would point them to.
But when it comes down to supplies, when you get the Lawn Be Gone, you get credits for buying your tubing and your irrigation and plants. And as if you're doing it yourself, you don't have any ability to get those incentives.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can only tell you that there are, sort of the freebies, if you will, that are available for water fixtures and the irrigation hardware that we're coming up with. And that's one thing. But if you're talking about like the broader program where somebody maybe more fiscally able hires a large, landscaper to come in and take out their lawn and put in these type of systems, I won't deny that it's certainly more able for these large homeowners to do versus say somebody on a fixed income. One thing that the county is doing and that we're trying to help is to make those incentives a little bit larger so that they can access them. But you're right. It's not something that we're able to just give out the entire cost of that program to a homeowner. And we can look at that, Claire, to try to see if there might be ways for maybe somebody low income or elderly to have more access to funds. It's not, you're right, it's not part of the current system, but it's something that I think your comments and others we've heard is something we can try to factor into the future. And here in San Mateo County, I think some of the people online are representing the county. We try to work hand in hand with them to see what we can do more, and affordability and economic issues are something that we should be considering for the future. I will say we're if we're in a dry year, if there is an actual drought declared and there's these public messages, I can tell you that the Lawn Be Gone program, the popularity increases almost fourfold. That's what we saw in the last drought. And so I imagine that the program may become even more popular. And so comments like yours, we should be thinking about, because this summer and maybe next summer, the program could become more and more popular again.
Thanks, Claire. I'll just hit Linda Lopez and then Kellex. Linda?
Oh, yes. I wanted to speak also to the burden that.
What organization, you want to say what organization you're with, Linda? You're still there?
Her mic just went out.
Oh.
Yes, I'm here. I'm here.
Okay, good.
My name is Linda Lopez. I'm currently serving on the North Fair Oaks Community Council, and I am working with several community-based organizations in North Fair Oaks. North Fair Oaks is unincorporated San Mateo County with a huge low-income population and a housing stock that is about 30% built before 1950. My family home was actually built in 1937, but those are very briefly some of the numbers. The concern is we always have concerns about the quality of the water, but more concerns about being able to replace pipes. And right now, California Water Service has outside contractors where the consumer has to pay or the homeowner has to pay for the service and they don't do pipes. So my question is it going to be possible to spend some time on looking at this problem around cost to homeowners who are low income and or fixed income? Thank you.
Well, I'll jump in a little bit. Cal Water Service is one of the BAWSCA member agencies, and I know that they have their own suite of conservation programs. They don't always take advantage of the BAWSCA programs that are available. In terms of how to address those, there's a lot of pressure on water agencies, including Cal Water, to do more to help disadvantaged residents and low-income residents. And so I can pass your question on to them, since they don't always participate in BAWSCA programs, to understand maybe more what they're going to try to do to address their, if you will, their disadvantaged residents. All I can say is it needs to be done. I don't necessarily have an answer for you in terms of whether they're doing it or how to go about it.
Yeah, I guess that's the problem. They're not, one is not talking to the other, but yeah, it's just an issue I wanted to bring up. Thank you.
Calix, jump in.
Thanks. Yeah, my name is Calix Nelson. I'm with the Resource Conservation District in San Mateo County, although my question isn't related to that. First, I want to say +1 to what Claire said, that very often incentive programs for whether it's soil health, habitat conservation, water conservation, often pays for materials and supplies, but not for technical assistance for people to be able to take advantage of those programs. So I want a +1 on that. But I wanted to ask if anybody on the panel or guests or anybody is aware of innovative approaches around the challenge that when water utilities are dependent on ratepayers for their budgets, that can be sort of contraindicated with large-scale water conservation. So if people are very successful at reducing their water use, it's lost revenue for the utilities and can create sort of like a dilemma. And I've been in like BAWSCA meetings and others talking about this. Does anybody know of any innovative financing or programs or way that that's been dealt with? Thanks.
Yeah, and I think I recall you from different BAWSCA programs, or BAWSCA events, and if not me, maybe it was my boss, the general manager, that was there. There isn't a particular program I can point you to that could be, quote unquote, seen as an innovative way to help finance some of these things, or to address this disconnect between the simple fact that, yes, if we put in more conservation programs, it has a rate increase, or has a rate impact, quote unquote. But what I can tell you is the state in this year is going to be coming out with water efficiency targets that all of our water agencies have to meet. And the only way to meet those water efficiency targets is going to be to implement conservation programs. So relatively speaking, yes, the state is, stepping in and mandating that we as water agencies meet those targets. And so they're expected to come out in October, and those targets are going to be measured and monitored by the state moving forward in the coming years and beyond. And I think that's going to be a big driver or push to see that we as water agencies continue to do more and more conservation. I can say there's, many BAWSCA member agencies do a really good job at trying to encourage conservation, but as Claire pointed out, there's other things that we could do to reach out to those that perhaps can't afford to take part in the program, because it does require somewhat of an investment by the homeowner to do these things.
And Calix, I'll chime in as well. In terms of larger scale projects, there have been a couple of innovative approaches with impact investors who are actually putting together different funding platforms, which is with a mixture of public and private funds, and risk mitigation bonds, environmental impact bonds, so that because it is difficult for the utilities to fund a lot of infrastructure projects, that they are calculating the value of, reducing nutrient runoff, reducing energy emissions, and somehow packaging that into a financial incentive for impact investors. So I can be happy to send you some contact information for that, because they're particularly looking for smaller projects and the under-resourced communities. That's one approach. And then in other regions, there's been some regional frameworks that have been put in place, kind of the same thing, to kind of look for different ways to finance so that the burden is not on the utility.
Thanks, Kellex, and the others who had a question. I think we'll wrap it up there because we're already 2 minutes over. But I too am trying to figure out how to change over my lawn to a low drought environment. And I think what I'm hearing here is that there's a public agency, Tom, there's potentially private funding. There's nonprofits on this call that all care deeply about water quality conservation. And the spirit of Thrive and ENS is how could we work together across sectors and across all the people on this call and the organizations they represent to come up with solutions. It's hard, but that's kind of the spirit of what we're here for, is to bring panelists and attendees together from different sectors and even different areas of sustainability, and that energy, as we heard earlier, is a key component of water. Didn't realize it was such a large component of our electricity going towards water. So with that, so much good information. It's too bad we can't stay longer, but we all have our families and our end of day tasks to get to. We do have another water session coming up next month, which will be really interesting, that Irma is going to help lead along with other leaders in Pescadero. And we'll be covering other topics beyond that in April, May, June, which we haven't announced yet. So thank you all again for participating, for your thoughtful presentations and questions and responses. And we will be sending a survey to get your feedback. We'd love to hear what you have to say about our programs. Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.